Hi, this is Jimmy Church, and you may have seen me on my new TV show over on Gaia Into the Vortex. Maybe you heard me on Coast to Coast AM. And of course, my show, Fade to Black, but none of that matters. What matters right now is what do you think about when you hear things like Bigfoot or ghosts or life after death and spirits and the paranormal and the supernatural? What do you think about? That's why I want to invite you out to the Parapod Festival. It's April 1st, 2023 at the Hyatt Regency in Valencia, California. We've got speakers, presenters. Of course, it's an award ceremony. We've got a night watch and a sky watch that's going to be going on. It's a huge one-day event where everything paranormal is going to be happening. It's all simple to do. I want you to visit parapodfilmfestival.com for tickets and information, and I'll see you there because it's all about the paranormal.
This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. What is the nature of astrology? We know astrology explores the stars to predict our future, to look into our past. And today we're going to explore how astrology is not only a practice, but it's also a science. Bruce Schofield, who is our guest today, and his new book, The Nature of Astrology, History, Philosophy, and the Science of Self-Organizing Symptoms. We'll look into the history, the philosophy, and methodologies of astrology, as well as its potential future applications into medicine and the social sciences. Sometimes science can seem a little over our heads, but today Bruce is going to bring it into layman's terms so we can all understand astrology. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, the one and only author, Bruce Schofield. There he is. He's out hunting. How's everything going on the East Coast there, Bruce?
it's actually today's warmer than usual, but it's winter and it's cold, and I have the wood stove going.
Oh,
And keeping part of the house upstairs pretty warm, pretty toasty.
I love it. I love it. And your background, is that like your backyard or something?
Yeah, that's the woods in back. I think there's
Oh, nice. Is that a sunset or sunrise?
sunset, yeah, sunset.
Perfect. Beautiful. Well, we are excited to have you here, and 2023 is here. Astrology is used in many different ways, and you wrote the book, The Nature of Astrology, History, Philosophy, and the Science of Self-Organizing Systems. And I think that it feels like it's a different take on how a lot of people have written books, and I kind of want to see what the process of the book itself is, and how you put it together.
Well, I have about a 55 years experience in astrology.
Wow.
And I made a living at it, full-time living at it for many years, for 3 or 4 decades. So I know a lot about it as a practice.
Right.
But my temperament is very scientific. And I, long ago recognized that the practice was only one part of astrology. And so I have kind of been on a campaign for a long time now to make it clear that astrology is a subject. And like medicine, there's or psychology, there's a practice associated with the subject. Unfortunately, I think the vast majority of astrologers don't recognize that. And they spend a lot of time trying to, defend astrology in its context as a practice. And
Right.
you can't say that any practice is a science, it's a craft.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's just a big waste of time. You have to separate practice from other things like theory,
Right.
history, and science research, that sort of thing. You have to separate those categories. So I'm arguing astrology is a subject. It's just undeveloped in some of these other areas. There is research in astrology. There's actually quite a bit of it. Some of it is very good. Most of it's terrible, but it exists. And that's the part of astrology that we could say is a science, just as much as medical science is a part of medicine, or psychological research is a part of psychology, but it's not the practice.
And
Anyway, that's a public service announcement that I've been making for a few decades now.
Well, one thing I love about this is, even 15, 20 years ago, and before that, people did go to psychics and astrologists and numerologists and all this because not many people really knew much about it other than these were the people that were trained in it, gifted with this ability. But nowadays in 2023, majority of the people have gotten so much smarter and more. They want more concrete. They want the scientific facts. Where even with ufology, how it's changed, because most of the listeners know as much almost as the speakers, and so I love this book that you put together for that reason. So it brings a little more scientific to astrology, and it gives a little more factual information. So 55 years. I mean, I thought you were like 35 in the first place. So, I mean, congratulations on that.
I'm 74.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, you look great. So putting this book together, I mean, you already had the knowledge, but where did you start on how you wanted to put the book into where people can really understand what you're trying to relay to them?
Well, it's the result of thinking about astrology for many decades, actually. Mm-hmm. But the impetus to do the book comes from having done a PhD program about 20 years ago. And it was at the University of Massachusetts where I was working. I got recruited by a well-known microbiologist and evolutionist. Her name is Lynn Margulis. Mm-hmm. Somebody worth knowing about. But she recruited me to help teach her class with the condition that I get a PhD, because I only had a master's. So I did one through the geosciences department. The title was A History and Test of Planetary Weather Forecasting. And it was based on a translation of a book that Johannes Kepler wrote called Tertius Interveniens, which means third party intervening. And it's a book that is basically a dialogue or an argument between an astrologer, a doctor, and a scientist.
Right.
And well, actually, Kepler himself is, one figure in there. Anyway, so this book was not available in English until a fellow I knew had translated it back in the 90s, or actually in the late 80s, and gave me, it was unpublished still, he gave me a manuscript, and I had read it a few times. And Johannes Kepler says, if you want proof of astrology, all you have to do is look at the weather and look at the positions of the sun and Saturn. And I took that seriously, and this eventually managed to make a PhD thesis out of it and showed that there was a correlation.
Wow. Okay.
I don't have a complete explanation for it, but it's scientifically sound, and the committee approved me, and you can find it on the University of Massachusetts website as one of the PhD dissertation. And then after that, I thought, well, I might as well make a book out of it. And I brought in a lot of other ideas. And, I think in a way, the book leads up to, it gives you a lot of background on how life has evolved in two kinds of environments. So one is the spatial environment that we all know. We live, geography affects evolution. Mm-hmm. If we live near water, we adapt to it. If we live in the desert, we adapt to it. It changes the culture. I mean, these are physical realities, but there's also a temporal environment, the rhythms of life, the alternation of day and night, and the cycle of the moon, and the cycles of the planets, and how they relate to the other things like the sun and moon, and different kinds of resonances form and all that. So I'm arguing, and I don't know that anybody else has ever really done it so as directly as I have, that this is a substantial environment that life has adapted to and evolved along with, and in fact internalized for the last 3.5 billion years. So I start off the book with that, and then I go to my argument that astrology actually works. Saturn affects our weather is basically what I'm saying. I wrote a scientific paper on it after I did my thesis, and it's called "A Signal from Saturn Found in Temperature Data Sets." So I took daily temperatures and I compared them to what was going on when the sun was opposite Saturn, and I found that the temperature goes down, especially in North America, northeastern North America, but it does in other parts of the world. And this goes contrary to what anybody would think in the scientific world. And my thesis committee was very concerned about it, but they found I did nothing wrong, and I actually used standard techniques of statistics and measurement and so on. So it raises a big question. What I am throwing up is out to look at is a statement saying that, wait a second, Saturn is affecting our weather. Right. And that the astrologers knew this for the last 2,000 years. What do we make of it? So then the rest of the book follows that. I spend a good deal of time on how astrology lost its position. It was a highly regarded subject for many years, and it basically dropped out of sight. And I have a chapter called "Marginalized," where I talk about how astrologers today operate and what the conditions you have to operate under. I have a section on scientific studies of astrology. I have a section on theories of astrology. So it's a pretty complete book. And one of the reasons it's called "The Nature of Astrology" is that I'm coming at the subject from the position of a naturalist. I'm observing nature. I'm trying to learn from nature. I'm not trying to impose some theory over it. Mm-hmm. A lot of astrologers, when asked how astrology works, say, well, the universe is all consciousness. Right. Yeah. Well, how do you know that? I mean, this is debated by philosophers, people who actually make a living at this, trying to think through these problems. The opposite would be physicalism, a purely materialist universe. I'm not saying I know the answer. I'm a naturalist. I'm in between somewhere. I'm just trying to learn what I can learn and recognize very clearly what I really can't know, at least at this point.
Well, I if you think about it, let's say you're under a shade tree. It's you're trying to get outside. So it's night. The temperature has dropped, but you walk into the sun and you're like, oh, you feel the temperature change. You feel the change in your body. The moon, the gravitational pull, when it's closest, it affects the tides. How does Saturn or with your biological studies, with modern biological studies, how does it affect us? Saturn and Venus and Mercury, how does that affect us and shape life on our planet here? We know what the sun does, we know what the moon does, but that's more physical. Is it physical shaping, or is it more spiritually shaping in your studies?
Well, it's a good question. One of the points I make in the book is that astrology is a subject that studies systems, self-organizing systems. Now, that would be like a cell or an organ, right, or a body, or mental activity that altogether forms a personality and a sense of self,
right,
or multiple selves forming a group, a nation, a stock market, weather, which is constantly moving, changing from the sun and from the rotation of the earth,
Right.
is a system, and climate is a system. If you feel comfortable thinking in terms of what's called deep time, climate is just as much a system as weather or a cell or something like that. But this is a class of phenomena recognized by scientists called systems that resists reductionist science to a great degree. Like we don't know where life came from. We don't know what consciousness is, really. I mean, there's people work at it. It's a work in progress, but it's not easy to test, right? So if we're dealing with systems in astrology, and that's all that astrology deals with, everything in astrology is dealing with a system. Whether you're doing mundane astrology and looking at the charts of nations, or in my case was looking at a chart for the first shot fired in the war on Ukraine.
Right.
And you could see that there's all sorts of stuff going on there now. They're all systems. They're all processes, hard to focus on. But what we do know about systems, and a lot is known because they are studied. They're studied in a lot of different disciplines, which is probably why people don't really know them that well. The mathematicians study systems, and they talk about chaos and complexity.
Mm-hmm.
The geosciences study it, and they talk about climate system. There's different terminology, but the bottom line here is that when you study systems, you learn a few things. One is that systems can be highly responsive to very weak signals. Now that's important. Really, Lorenz talked about a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil and causing a tornado in Texas. Right? So, that's what we're talking about here. So if we take that perspective, we at least opens the door to thinking that, well, hey, maybe the planets are affecting us. It's just at a level that we're not able to detect with our instruments at this point. Or maybe there's some other medium that's taking place. When I did my study, I calculated the gravitational effect of Saturn on the Earth's atmosphere. And it turns out to be about 4 orders of magnitude weaker than that of the moon. It's pretty small, but it's there.
Right.
And I remember, one geoscientist in my committee saying, "Oh, that's a lot stronger than I thought it might be." So, it's not negligible, apparently. So it's quite possible that there are effects, physical effects like gravity or electromagnetism that are occurring constantly, that are just at a very low level, but that life has been reading those and using it to build structures, internal structures, and using it for timing, like say developmental stages. So this is a possible, more or less physical explanation for astrology. And
it kind of
for
gives
the effects of the planets, right?
It kind of gives a whole new meaning of even little things mean a lot. So
yeah. So what I'm saying in response to your question is that the planets may be exerting influences in line with forces that we already know about. They're just very small, but they have big effects. That's one answer.
No, that's a great answer. Astrology has been around, oh my God, for thousands of years. And I kind of want to go backwards a little bit when it comes to maybe exploring a little bit more of past astrology, because there's so many different ways of people practice it nowadays. It's even like religion. 2,000 years ago, even in the Bible, they state certain things that today are completely not relevant to what we talk about today, stoning women and, mixing fabrics and all this different things, but it doesn't really pertain to us in society today. But some people still want to live by the laws of 2,000 years ago. Same with astrology. Well, how is astrology 2 or 3,000 years ago compared to today, and how has it changed, and how has it not changed? Is there some practices that have been very solid in the how do I say that? How has it not changed? Put it that way. And how has it changed to where it kind of just fits more of the modern day?
Well, astrology, as we know it, basically coalesced probably in the first few centuries before the Common Era.
Right.
So 200 BC to probably 280. That's really when astrology formed in a way that we know it today. Where
More
you
understandable.
have
Yeah.
birth charts and you have planets and whatever. Some things have stayed the same. The definitions or the understanding of the planets has remained more or less the same. You can account for cultural differences, but Saturn is still restricting and restraining and confining.
Right.
And it always was seen that way. And Jupiter, expansive and so on. So that's been consistent. The techniques have changed, although there are many people in astrology that have discovered these ancient techniques and they work with them, and some even believe that that's all you need to know, so I would call them astrological fundamentalists.
And I remember talking to Scott Walter, a forensic geologist, and he had a TV show called America Unearthed. I don't know if you know Scott, but
No.
There were certain structures that 2,000 years ago, when the sun or moon aligned with the particular, let's say the Sphinx. But now 2,000 years later, it may be slightly off because of the rotation of the Earth has shifted. Does that affect
precession? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but how does that affect astrology, and how do they adjust for that?
Well, that only comes into play when you're talking about the zodiac.
Oh, okay.
And so you need, and I actually have a couple sections that talk about the history of the zodiac in the book.
Oh, great.
Which I think is important for people to know about, because there are two zodiacs. One's the sidereal zodiac, which is a zodiac based on the constellations. And then there's the tropical zodiac, which is a zodiac based on the seasons. So it starts with the first day of spring. That's when Aries begins. They're now about 25 degrees, 26 degrees apart. But around the time that astrology first coalesced, they were more or less the same. But over the first few centuries of the Common Era, astrologers, eventually settled on the tropical zodiac as being the one that they preferred. In fact, Ptolemy in 150 AD argued that was the most appropriate one to use. But that occurs because of what's called precession of the equinoxes. And it's a long cycle that moves the, say if you could look at the constellation Aries, you pick a star, or look at any constellation for that matter, and you keep measuring it over a couple thousand years, it's moved back almost a sign. And it keeps going through the zodiac, and it completes a cycle about every 26,000 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's slow. That's I've argued that and others have as well, that the Maya calendar, the long count, 5,200 years, is 1/5 of the precession cycle. And so that the Maya probably knew about it as well as did the Egyptians, the Greeks. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it did. Thank you.
Should I explain what precession actually is?
Could you please? Because I didn't have the word, but some people may not know what precession is.
Yeah, precession is caused by a wobble in the Earth's axis. So the Earth is spinning like a top, but like a top, the axis, the poles, if you imagine a sphere with the poles, it makes a wobble, and it takes 26,000 years to go around that wobble. Now that point that's moving is the North Pole, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, And so it will point to different stars. Right now it's pointing to Polaris. We call it the North Star, but 12,000 years from now, it'll be far away from it.
Wow.
And so this wobble creates changes also along the plane of the Earth's equator. And that's where the intersection of the Earth's equator, if you take the Earth's equator and project it outwards, it forms a plane. That's called the celestial equator. And then if you take the Earth's orbit around the sun, that also forms a plane. And we see that as the ecliptic, and they intersect at an angle that is shifting because of this wobble. And when two planes intersect, a line is formed. And so this line is slowly rotating backwards in the zodiac. If you go online and you look up precession, you can see nice diagrams. Today, it's much better much easier to be able to understand how that works. It's abstract.
So you said shift. What would happen with the astrology if and when, because it's going to happen, the polar shift happens?
Well,
does that affect astrology or just more affect?
There are slight polar shifts happening now and then, things like volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that. They mess up the Earth's rotation a little bit, and there are consequences for it, but it's very small amounts. That's one thing. Another thing is the location of the Earth's magnetic pole. And some people talk about that. And that you talk about pole reversals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a process that takes some time.
Yeah.
They can happen within a few thousand years, though.
It's not going to be like you wake up the next morning and you're like flipped
I
upside
doubt it. I knew when I was in geosciences, there was a professor there that was more or less spending her whole career on analyzing these lava beds, one over on top of another, that went back millions of years, I think, in South America. And she found that the average polar reversal takes about 10,000 to 20,000 years, but some were a little faster.
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's my firsthand experience. I heard her lecture a number of times on it, show her the results of her studies.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people say that they're like, "Oh my God, it's going to shift," and it is. They act like it's you go to bed one day and you wake up the next, and you're in the South Pole.
Yeah, well, what the way they do that is, lava comes out of the volcano and it's liquid,
right,
or it's molten, and there's a lot of iron in it, and so the molecules of iron line up with the magnetic field at the time, and then it becomes solid, right? So that becomes like a memory. It's almost like recording tape, right? So it memorizes the position that the poles are at that point, and then say 100 years later, another volcanic eruption dumps more lava on top, and there's a slight change. And so what they've actually found is that the poles start breaking down. We're in a bipolar situation now, called a dipole, but they break down into a quadrupole and an octopole. So there's all these different poles spread out all over the Earth for a little while, and then the whole thing kind of collapses on itself and reverses. And then you get back to a dipolar situation.
And I think you mentioned in the book, was it Greek that really kind of developed astrology, or what? I think it was Greek that you said.
Well, Western astrology developed in Mesopotamia.
Right. Okay.
Babylon was the intellectual center of that sort of thing. But that went on for a couple thousand years. And the Greeks, when they got a hold of it, and that occurred more or less after Alexander kind of opened up the world. He was Macedonian and he marched into Mesopotamia, opened up, he tried to take over India, but the elephants got him there, I guess. Anyway, a lot of subject matter, moved around after that point. And when the Greeks got a hold of the astrological tradition, they added a lot of geometry to it. The Greeks were just great at geometry. And Alexandria, Egypt, was became the new intellectual center. And I believe it was probably put together around then. Some people in astrology argue that there was probably some genius, some Einstein of astrology that really mixed all the elements that were floating around at the time into some kind of form. And there are these documents. There's a document attributed to, or actually a set of them, Micipso and Petasiris, a high priest and an Egyptian pharaoh that were apparently thought to be the fathers of astrology. But it's unclear. Those things do exist, though.
No, that's great. And I know that because you teach more, is it, what is it, Verdict? Or what is your specialty in astrology? Or are you kind of versed in all?
I'm a GP.
What is it?
I'm a general practitioner.
And do you still work with clients or?
No, I retired.
Oh, okay. So you're just enjoying your time and writing some books. That's good.
Well, not really. I have a lot of unfinished business. I got to clean out my house. My parents died a few years ago.
Oh, that's too bad.
There's been some health issues, so I just had to, slow down and eventually stop the horoscope readings to give myself some time to decompress.
Got to take care of yourself
it's really
first.
More a matter of health.
Yeah, take care of yourself first. That's definitely the first thing we need from you. So, okay, I want to go. We talked a lot about the past, but what about the future of astrology? I know you also mentioned future applications in medicine and the social sciences. How can this astrology, the methodology of astrology, affect that?
Well, there's been a long association of astrology with medicine in the West. We talk about, Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and yet we don't really talk too much about traditional Western medicine. And one of the reasons why is that it was deeply connected to astrology, and you have to understand astrology in order to do traditional Western medicine.
Right.
And very few people have cracked that, connection. There are a few books written on it. Lee Lehman, who's an astrologer in the U.S., has written on it and tried to flesh out some of it. But I think in the future there may be some roles that astrology could play, particularly in terms of timing things like surgery, but also timing things in terms of when to take certain medications. This is an actual subject now. It's called chronopharmacology. But it's based largely on circadian cycles, just daily cycles.
Right.
I mean, lots of studies have been done that show that, you can take a certain kind of medicine at a certain time of day and it won't do anything. But if you take it another time of day, it's very effective. Of course, the doctors don't have the time to fool around with that. And most people don't have the lifestyle or the discipline, to do it properly. So it's a subject that's kind of fallen into the cracks. But I think astrology could add to it, could develop it a bit more. But astrology will have to have a better basis of explanation before it works its way back into the medical field.
Kind of reminds me of like when women, they have their, they always say, it's our time to make a baby. They they know when it's time to, they're the most fertile. So maybe that's kind of very similar to the.
Well, there's an aside to that. I worked as a astrological consultant for many years, and there were quite a few cases where women wanted to have a kid. And what I learned is that when they, become pregnant and plus 9 months time of birth, you can get a pretty good idea of what that pregnancy is going to be like. In fact, you can pretty much, in most cases, know what sex it's going to be right from the beginning.
Oh, wow.
So that's information that could be useful. I recently advised someone about when to have a child, and they put it off for a few years and did it then, and are very satisfied with the result. I'm glad to hear that. But there were quite a few cases where that happened. People came to me that weren't able to conceive, and you look at their charts and you see that there are more appropriate times than others.
Yeah.
It may have to do with the stress level. If a person has a lot of very challenging aspects on their chart, maybe that's not a good time to get pregnant, because your body's racked with stress, and systems are likely to not go so well. But if you have relaxed conditions, things will probably proceed as they should.
So do you suggest people use their astrology or zodiac sign to make futuristic or future decisions in their life? Or do you feel that sometimes they can just get too caught up into relying on that? Because, people, I remember growing up, everybody, today my sign said, and they would make decisions on what the newspaper said about their sign. So what do you feel about that?
Well, I think if you're working with a competent astrologer, and there are a few out there, anybody can be an astrologer now. You just need a website.
Right.
But I'm talking about the ones that really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
That can be very helpful. I always suggest that people learn something about it themselves, and there are a few people that can get quite good at it. I've had clients of mine that have followed that advice and have gotten quite good at being their own astrologer. But there is, as you mentioned, a lot of it's a challenge sometimes to interpret the information in a way that's not going to be detrimental. You have to be careful. Astrological information to the wrong people is not a good thing. I've had experiences in my career with people that you say one thing that they don't like and they break down.
Right. They only want to hear what they want to hear.
Yeah, and then you don't tell them all that stuff, and then they get mad at you because you haven't told them anything.
Right.
So, you have to find a polite way to, leave that client behind.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Some people, it's the same with anything. Some people have the kind of temperament that works with astrology, and others don't.
Well, before we get out of here, I commend you for writing the books that you have, and you may have more than this, but I'm looking.
Yeah, I have. This book is called The Nature of Astrology, and I consider this my magnum opus. This is the result of all my thoughts about what astrology, was and could be, and so on. And this is published by Inner Traditions. So you can go on the Inner Traditions website. They often have discounts, and you can order it there. But it's also for sale at the usual places like Amazon and B&N. I have another book published by the Wessex Astrologer called What Astrology Is and How to Use It, which is an introductory book. And then I have a bunch of other books on more complex subjects, calculations and biological theory, and books on Mesoamerican astrology and so on. And I wrote a lot of hiking guides in my day.
I'm looking, you can just go to Amazon and you can see all kinds of books. But how now in your early 70s, almost mid 70s, how has that changed your astrology thought? And how has it changed since you started in this field?
Well, I think I'm starting to get better at it. I think that to really, with what we know about astrology today,
right,
and what we know about astrology today is largely the result of 2,000 years of history. And there's been some new developments, but it's, astrology is about 300 or 400 years behind all the other subjects for reasons that I outline. And I get into some detail on the nature of astrology, but it's a little bit behind. But given that, and where am I going with this? What was your question again?
How has your thought of astrology changed?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So given that, I think I need about another 100 years to get to the point where I could say I'm a real master of it. Yeah, that's something hard to wrap your head around. That's why I forgot it. I look at charts all the time. I look at my own chart all the time. Every morning I get up and I turn on the computer and I've got, I run all my transits for the day, including the lunar transits, which, could be 25 to 50 transits in a day. And I think about them and I compare them to what I'm doing that day and how things pan out. And I look at I look at my wife's chart. I look at my friends and sisters, and I look at political charts. Events
cool.
happen. I watch the news and I follow the unfolding of events. I'm doing this all the time. Astrology is this language that I learned, and I'm getting better at it all the time. But I really think I need another 100 years.
Well, I think, and there's nothing against anybody that's starting in their 20s that, learning this craft and this, gift, I think, for a lot of people. But, some people that I see them on TikTok, again, nothing against TikTok, that they know it. They're 22 years old and they think they know everything about astrology. And here's Bruce, who has been doing this for 55 years, saying, I need another 100 to understand this fully. So, that's pretty great. That's pretty great. Well, how do people
practice? Remember, that's the practice of it.
Yeah. It's like a doctor, because when you left medical school 30, 40 years ago, technology, medicine has changed since then. So you constantly have to work and reintroduce yourself to the craft. And
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, where do people find your book? I know we said Inner Traditions.
Yeah, Inner Traditions has it on their website, but you could buy it at all the other outlets wherever books are sold. I suppose we could say that.
Well, Bruce, you are great. I hope you come back again, and we can dive into other subjects and when it comes to astrology.
Thanks for having me on. I'm sorry, my camera usually does a much better job than this, but for some reason it's a little foggy today, and
we're at the end of Mercury retrograde.
And the Mars station.
And
Whoa,
Mars,
yeah. That been something,
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's how being an astrologer, when it comes to like Mercury and Mars, and when it gets in these retrogrades, how serious do you take it?
Well, if it happens on your natal chart, like Mars is stationing now at 8 degrees of Gemini, and my wife's rising sign, her ascendant, is 8 degrees of Gemini, and she's having one hell of a problem with sinus infection and colds, and she's been in bed for a few days and had to cancel all her activities.
Oh no.
So if it's on your chart, it's not directly hitting me, so I'm just observing as usual.
I do think it's funny, and not necessarily a ha-ha way, but funny that a lot of times with Mercury, each time is different. One time your car doesn't start, your computer breaks down. Then the next time it's you're fighting with friends and family, and it's like it hits you completely different almost every single time. So you never know what to expect during a retrograde. Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury.
Well, it's your natal chart that tells the difference. That's why you can't just make a blanket statement about Mercury retrograde.
Right, and I think a lot of people do.
If the point hits your chart, like with this Mars business, this Mars is hitting Joe Biden's chart pretty strong right now.
Right. Yeah, sure is. Yeah, it's how do you check your natal? Is it natal, right?
Natal, yeah.
How do you check that? How do you need to go to an astrologist to?
No, you can get it. You can get your natal chart calculated online. There's astro.com is a great website to go to for you can get your natal chart. You can get progressions. You can learn astrology there. Lots of it's European. It's well done. Nice website.
I will have.
So once you have your natal chart, you now have your grid. That's your printed circuit. And then you can work with it. You can notice, like if you have the moon at early Pisces, well, guess what? Saturn's going to go into early Pisces in a few months, and you will feel it.
Oh, that's great.
And then what you could do is you can go back 30 years when did it the last time and see how it was. And that'll give you some information about what it might be like. You could read about it in books, or you can ask an astrologer to interpret it.
There you go. Well, everybody, now go to get your natal chart done. Astrologer, or is it Astro? What is it?
It's astro.com. Yeah.
Astro.com. So, well, thank you, Bruce, so much for being here. I can't wait to have you back. And I hope your wife feels better.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pass it on.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Truth Be Told. Don't forget, you can get your tickets now at parapodfestival.com. And for our March 31st through April 1st festival conference, it's a podcast awards. And if you're a podcaster, please, in the paranormal genre or true crime genre, please submit your podcast now by going to parapod.com. parapodfestival.com and get your tickets. Linda Moulton Howe, we're giving her the Lifetime Achievement Award. Billy Carson, Jimmy Church, Robert Schock. The list goes on and on and on, and you can check out all of our speakers. And we're having a stargazing. I'm excited about that too at Vasquez Rocks. And so please come and join us. Listen to Robert Hensley on Monday for the Minutemen Report. Bonnie Burkert on Wednesday at 3 o'clock for Truth Be Told Transformation. And, of course, me every Friday. And until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. Take care of yourself. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.